should stay muted and switch off the video and so on. Yeah, so it will start now. See you soon.
So everyone, I can now confirm that we are live on YouTube. I'll pop the link into the chat group so we can share it. We're still on 34, so that's fine.
Okay, so welcome everyone. It's 5 o'clock, Monday afternoon, 25 October 2021. We have right now the first European Gaia talk organized by the SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers. And we present to you today sustainable solutions from the oil and gas industry with the topic methane management. Our speakers will be Elisabetta Polali from Eni, Marco van Veen from MIQ, and George Taibosch, also from MIQ. I will be the moderator, number one, and moderator number two will be Maria Giulia De Donno from SPE Italian section. And I'm the liaison for the SPE Gaia Sustainability Program in Europe, and I'm very happy to be the host of this meeting. And I have some short announcements in the beginning. So first of all, for everyone who's in the Zoom meeting, please stay muted. Please stay muted and please be polite and switch off your video because we need the bandwidth for our speakers. And if you have questions, please type the questions into the chat and in the end, we will read it out loud. We will start with a short introduction about the Gaia program, and then we will give some overview about methane emissions and LNG. That will be done by Giulia. And then we will have a presentation by Elisabetta Polali from Eni, followed by a presentation of MIQ by Marco and George. There will be questions from the moderators first, and then there will be a chance for the audience to ask additional questions at the end. We will try to be finished by 1 hour, so at 6 o'clock we should be finished with this meeting. So enjoy. So for everyone who is not familiar with the SPE Gaia Sustainability Program, we have a website. It's called spe.org/en/Gaia. You can easily find it, or you can easily Google it, or you can find us on LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn community, SPE Gaia Sustainability Community on LinkedIn. And the idea of Gaia, the SPE Gaia Sustainability Program, is basically to find solutions for our sustainability challenges that we are facing today, inside and outside the energy industry. The Gaia mission is, you can see it here, and I will read it loud because it's important to understand before we start. The idea and the mission of the Gaia program is reaching deep within the industry to share knowledge, first of all, share knowledge about the sustainable development through resources, thought leadership, and applied best practice. And our program, the Gaia Sustainability Program, aims to enable all individuals in the oil and gas industry and beyond to act in the service of sustainable socio-economic development through their professional societies, empowering those at all levels within organizations to create actions, and I'm stressing this, to address the planet's sustainability challenges. So it's not only about talking, we will talk today, but it's also very important to understand that Gaia was made to create action. And this is done by producing pathways for action and principles to ensure impact on priorities. Very quickly, brief overview, our principles are aggregation, engagement, and collaboration inside and outside the industry. Pathways are innovation, measuring what matters, listening and communication, and our priorities, number one, energy transition, number two, regenerate natural capital and social responsibilities. Very quick overview about the Gaia framework. You can find much more information on our website. Quick introduction of our team in Europe, the biodiverse ocean of the Gaia team. So we have monthly meetings to discuss hot topics and to find solutions, actions for meeting the challenges of our planet today. And one of these challenges is the following one, and we are all aware of our climate change topic. We have a planet that has an atmosphere that is changing, and it's increasing its temperature. And we had defined a 1.5 degrees goal a few years ago, and obviously we are off target. And this is a big problem, but we have some solutions. And one solution could be include ideas from the SPE, ideas from the oil and gas industry, to take responsibility and to present some technical solutions and make it feasible, make it reality, and make it a business case and business models, very important. And one of these very urgent topics, and we read more and more news today and during the last days, more and more, we learn about methane emissions, and this is our topic today. And Julia will teach you a little bit more about some details.
Yeah, can you change slide? So here we have done a really fast overview on methane emissions, since it's going to be a part of the net zero equation. As you all know, we focus a lot on carbon dioxide, on CO2, and we mentioned some differences between CO2 and methane. First of all, methane stays in the atmosphere less than CO2. It stays in the atmosphere a decade. Instead, the CO2 has centuries long persistence. So this is the first difference. But methane traps many times more heat, so it's still a part of the equations. And on the GHG emissions. And second point is that is the second largest driver of global warming. So the first, of course, is the CO2, but the second one is the methane, with 30% of the temperature increase, and 30% of the temperature increase is linked to methane. Moreover, methane emissions have risen about 25% in the past 20 years, and they are irregular, and they emitted intermittently, and they are highly dispersed. So this is why they are difficult to manage. One good news, let's say, that let's say where we know where to focus our attention, since 98% of humanity's methane emission is linked with 5 industries. First, there is the agricultural sector with 40–50% of methane emissions. Then there is oil and gas with 20 to 25 of methane emissions. And then we have coal mining, solid waste management, and wastewater management. Focusing on oil and gas, that is the topic of today, we can also say that methane management is extremely, you can change the slide. Yeah. Is extremely interesting, because if we consider 20 macro trends that have been considered for oil and gas in the post-pandemic scenario, methane management touched 7 of them. And I would like to mention, they are sustainability, shale industry, LNG, gas to liquids, gas flaring, industrial internet, and big data. And we will touch all of them during this talk. Also here we have 4 very quick indications, but they will be, for sure, Elisabetta, Marco, and George will go more in deep on this topic. 4 actions to reduce methane emission. One is expand monitoring, reporting, and verification. And on this, I will leave the floor to MAQ. Support sustainable consumption, upgrading the project portfolio to low carbon project, or differentiating assets based on their methane footprints. Then there is increased innovation, both in methane monitoring and in prevent losses. In particular, I would like to mention that there is an obligation to improve leak detection and repair. So innovation is very needed on this topic, and also we sometimes have lack of awareness of the available technology. And then there is an upgrade of the infrastructure. So some actions are quick wins, maybe also limited cost, but the upgrade of the infrastructure, of course, need coordinated actions. And focusing a little bit more on gas, and you can change the life. And focusing a little more on gas, since methane is liquid, and natural gas, of course, is a major part of natural gas. We would like to mention that also the topics of LNG and gas to liquid are strictly linked with methane emission, as Elisabetta will give us an overview. And there are two really macro trends. From one side, because they're attracting a lot of investments, since, as we know, gas is a low carbon source of energy in our transition phase. And there's both large scale LNG development and small scale LNG development are attracting a lot of investments. And from the other side, as we say, one point is the gas flaring. Small scale LNG and gas to liquid help to monetize flare of gas. And also gas to liquid units are very useful because are modular and making them very reusable. Nowadays are still not economically feasible, but they can be very useful with projects with shorter life cycles as oil shales. And we want really to mention that because in the US new government will put a very stricter regulation and legislation on emission on shale players. So now I don't want to take much more time, so I will introduce our first speaker, who is Elisabetta Purlalia. We go deeply in the concept of how to transform a threat into value. We have in mind the common goals of reducing carbon emission down to zero while improving access to energy to local communities for local growth and monetizing resources that will be otherwise wasted. So Elisabetta is working in energy since 1999 with a very challenging position, mainly linked with gas. We'll mention some of them. She was head of negotiation of long-term gas supply, head of LNG sales, senior vice president for global LNG business development. She also worked as senior vice president in digital, thanks to her transversal experience. And nowadays she's back to gas since now she's LNG business as head of LNG equity valorization. And she will deal with full value integration along the energy value chain of gas. So Elisabetta is strongly convinced that energy sector is a normal sector, and changing attitude based on people-centric approach is a must. So we should work on awareness and culture. So I will give her the floor and ask her, Elisabetta, how do you see the sustainable recovery of methane?
So, Giulia, first of all, thank you very much for having me today and for the brilliant introduction. I'm extremely pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to this session of Gaia Talk, because I think that the aim of one of the aim of Gaia Talk with respect to ensuring knowledge is key. And I would like, in fact, to contribute by offering a positive view of a negative issue, because I think that we can reach multiple goals by transforming what is a threat today into an opportunity. The threat is the methane emission, as you said, and the opportunity is the reduction of it with all what it implies. So first of all, we must work, I think, on the awareness of common people, on the real benefit of gas, on how it can be reused. And I like to think that only if we know energy in deep, we can have the possibility of changing and transforming energy. And if we know how to treat energy, we can exploit all the advantages of the latest technology to foster let's say, a circular reuse of energy in its liquid form. By doing that, we can envisage some new opportunities also in terms of new profession and new jobs opening up, so as new business models to be scouted, because really our let's say the energy world is a always changing world. And with this, we will also contribute to a local sustainable development. So we need to start understanding and spreading out the concept that energy, let's read gas, must not be wasted, and that gas can be reused by repurposing that gas. And finally, that the wasted energy can be turned into value. So the concept is to reuse the gas via transforming that into liquid as microscale LNG to feed a kind of circular virtuous value chain where gas to liquid offers opportunities out of the current threat for the environment. So flare gas recovery is the process of recovering wasted gas that would normally be flared. And these gases are then used elsewhere in the facility by reducing emission and waste gas and increasing the efficiency of the plant. Additionally, the recovery allows a circularity of the supply chain with a process which is involving a capturing of that gas from the flare knockout, compressing it using small refrigerant technology which are available, and be ready to be loaded and transported. Flare gas recovery can be used in situ, so locally, or converted into marketable gas in liquid form as fuel for trucks, for vessels, as feed gas for very small power plants in developing countries, and also for penetrating new markets. And let's say we have already some countries that can offer example of successful implementation of these mini LNG solutions for flare gas recovery. So it's already a reality, but it's a reality that we should try to scale up. Mini LNG is virtually identical to conventional LNG. It's differing only in scale. The big difference, which is in our case is a pro, is that the liquid can be transported easily via trucks on shore and via barges offshore, also in rivers, rather than with large conventional marine vessels that require, let's say, a completely different, let's say, environment. Typically, LNG plants range from 0.5 till 7.8 million tons per annum, using loading vessels from 80,000 cubic meters, so this very small one, up to 260 cubic meters, while small-scale plants are less than 0.5 million tons per annum, and are using vessels which are maximum 30,000 cubic meters. This helps, in any case, to reach remote demand places that are not reachable by pipe, and that via vessel, on the contrary, is possible to reach. And that can be an alternative to using other fuels which are very much polluting, like diesel. With mini LNG, which is even smaller, we allow to source the gas at the flare point, transform it in liquid, and being loaded and transported to, for example, local aggregator or local buyers for volumes up to 0.1 million tons per annum. So we are talking about really minor volumes, small volumes, but that could create a very big difference for that market. So technology is there, is mature, is available, but still, as Julia was mentioning, is still expensive, but it's expensive without major local incentives. So the support of the governments is key to have the development of such an infrastructure. It's important to explain and work on the awareness of the potential offered by gas recovery, stimulating really a new way of a critical thinking in people, in common people, to stimulate also new ideas, because the energy transition we are in takes decades to happen, and there are still too many uncertainties. So we have, I think, to carefully avoid to waste the energy we have, and instead we have to transform it. This having very well in mind the common goals of reducing carbon emissions up to zero, so as solving the net zero equation, while improving in the same time the access to energy to local communities for the local growth and for the monetization of gas that otherwise would be wasted. And so we have to have very well in mind the dual challenge. So we need to act on culture and on the awareness on what can be done effectively, exploiting the technology which is available, and to make a change possible in our reality. So methane emission can be reduced with proven technology and via a circular use of the gas that is part of the challenging transition game. But let's see where we are. We are still in a situation where an impressive number of people are in need of energy and to access to energy, so the so-called energy poverty. We still have remote places which are uneconomical to be served and to be supplied, while with microscale LNG would be possible. Many volumes of gas are still wasted via flaring and venting in the world, not only to fossil extraction as was anticipated earlier. And we are talking about 174 BCM a year, which is a huge number of wasted gas. So billions of cubic meters of gas wasted instead of being used by people who are in need of it. And that's such a pity. Just to make a comparison, do consider that the yearly demand of Italy is 100 cubic meters per year. And we are talking about, it's a small country with a population of 60 million. So means that with roughly half of the wasted gas, we feed a full population. So that's really impressive. And the other thing, that the other fact that we have to be very aware of is that CH4, so the methane emitted, is environmentally unfriendly, as we all very well know. We know as an additional fact that, will or not, gas is and will remain the dominant source of energy for the next decade. And it implies that we cannot waste it. So thinking about the definition of gas flaring, flare gas refers to burning natural gas associated with oil extraction that takes place for different reasons. It could be for lack of infrastructure, lack of appropriate regulation, and it could be also for safety reasons. Of course, I'm not referring to safety flaring. I'm referring to recovering of routine flaring, which is really wasted gas. We all know that by extracting fossil fuels, then there is this release of methane, increasing the AGs, and we want to avoid. What people, on the contrary, the common people don't know is that via recycling we can capture that emission, and that almost 45% of such emissions are already now technically possible to be avoided at a cost, but that could be a reduced cost with the help of the local communities. It's a matter of putting in place measures and technology, so action should be taken. Some policy measures have already taken place, such as leak detection, ban on non-emergency gas flaring and venting. But these measures should be much more spread out and adopted as quickly as possible. And certainly, Marco and George will touch more in detail that. Moreover, measure I think can be taken all along the value chain to recover along the entire chain the waste of sources, and that would definitely increase the zero carbon footprint, and also, which is important, spread best practices across the industry. So we know that we can stop this waste of energy and we can exploit positively, creating value and opportunities in a kind of triple win for environment, for local energy market, for new professions, means new employment. And I think we are too much accustomed to slogan for bad, but we should also support slogan for good. And I think we can contribute also with Gaia talk to change this attitude in our business or towards our business. I think that we need to speak easy, promote an aware path towards the common goal of the energy transition, but being, let's say, pragmatic. We have to stress the fact that gas is still needed and that will still be needed for many years to come. So has a big role, not only as a source of energy, but also as a transformative element, so the bridging to the energy transition. Especially in its more flexible and liquid form, which is the LNG. And the LNG can be really the contributor to the decarbonization journey. The LNG, let's say, recycled by the methane emission, and that could be really a kind of backstone, a backstone of a new way of acting and doing by reusing energy. We must be aware that the journey inspired by the SDGs has indeed to take into account the dual challenge, as I was mentioning earlier. So the fact that from one side, we have to ensure access to efficient, reliable, and sustainable energy for all, while we have to reduce the climate changing emission and to combat the climate change in line with the Paris Agreement. All energy companies have to start a roadmap, and I think most of them did, with clear commitments in this respect, and as to realize rapidly that an evolution or revolution of its business model is needed, and that a new phase has to be started for a long-term value creation for all stakeholders by promoting I think really new business based on circularity, and also based on the recycling of waste energy products. So why I speak about from threat to opportunity, because you can afford a non-waste of energy by a micro-scale LNG, and let local communities that don't have access to energy to benefit of the energy that otherwise would not be reaching them. So it's possible, it's achievable, and it's something in a size that can be implemented everywhere. This kind of conversion is helping preventing the pollution, and also thanks to technology and to the flaring emission tracking progress, the world can have evidence of all the flaring situation and finding the appropriate intervention to recover instead of flaring. So what does it mean? It means that liquefaction technology makes gas more compact, easier to transport, and contributes to make an easier access to gas by the local communities, instead of diesel, for example, and means that it could be really a flexible solution to approach new markets. It would be nice to think that with the micro or mini scale LNG, we can contribute to make energy poverty a memory. And I think that the small refrigerant technology for small LNG production could really be a solution for monetize small volumes. We are talking about really from 1 to 15 million scuff per day that can reduce dramatically the current flaring. And additionally, the liquefaction is also helping to prevent sabotage attacks in some cases to pipelines, where it usually happens, like, for example, along the Niger Delta area. So company can reduce the routine flaring by finding uses of gas instead of burning it. Just as a curiosity, the repurpose of wasted gas through transformation into liquid corresponds to planting, I read, roughly 200 million of new trees with respect to forestry, and reduction of over 2 million of cars from the streets. And then it has also let's say the advantage, the small LNG plants, they have the advantage of being modular, and they can really be fit to the current effective needs and can grow up, so scaled up according to the increase of the production or the recycle of the gas increases or repurposed. So a recycle of methane turned into liquid is a modular viable solution offering good future opportunity. I think that it's important to realize that tech is there and it's fundamental to exploit it. It's known, it works, it allows the creation of new business models locally, increasing the local community growth and access to energy. And I think that thanks to technology, what we could do in the next 5-10 years will be a much greater step compared to what has been done in the past 200 years. So my personal view is that by the correct spreading out of the opportunity and the potential of gas repurposed in liquid, we can really help even to regain as energy business to regain a little bit of trust in the common view of people towards the energy companies. But we have to act also on this crucial cultural change and awareness of what can be done. And I think that's all my contribution for now. So I would just finish saying, I really think that from waste we can create a lot of value.
Super. Thank you very much, Elisabetta, for this important statement. And I think we all agree that we should not waste gas that can heat our homes and can create business instead. And we will come back to you later with questions. But first, we want to give the chance to MIQ to present their new approach of reporting methane emissions. And I'm very happy to have Marco van Veen here. He has a background in a lot of gas reporting. He worked for the European Commission. He worked for Wintershall, and he's right now he's an associate at MIQ Methane Intelligence. And also George Taibush. He's a senior advisor at MIQ with a background from Centrica, from Goldman Sachs, and he even worked for JP Morgan. And I'm very happy to have you two guys here. And I will start with a question to Marco. So, because right now we have so many news about natural gas, so we currently have to pay extreme prices for energy. The coal prices are exploding, and also the oil and the gas prices increased dramatically. So, but at the same time, we are observing gigantic emissions of methane, anthropogenic emissions of methane, and that appears a little bit, in my opinion, chaotic. So we are wasting our resources, and at the same time, we have to pay a lot for it. So, Marco, how can we still send the right signals to the market and create incentives to reduce our methane emissions?
Yeah, thank you, Joschka, for this introduction, and also thank you, Elisabetta, for giving us this really positive narrative. So let's look into what options we have to create those incentives. So at MIQ, we created this market-based solution. Let me just share my screen. So George and myself, we are working for the MIQ Foundation, which is an independent not-profit partnership between the NGO RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute, and a systemic consulting firm in the field of energy, sustainability, and land use. So as you have heard already in the introduction by Julia, methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas. And just to add a little bit of perspective here, so if we assume over a 20-year time horizon that methane is 84 times as powerful as CO2, and we compare those equivalents to other emissions that occur out there, then all the emissions, methane emissions from oil and gas currently equal 8 times the CO2 emissions from the global aviation sector. Or you could compare it to 2 times the CO2 emissions emitted in Europe. So it's quite a big number. At the same time, the International Energy Agency has estimated that 75% of those emissions could be abated technically with technology we have available today. And 45% of those emissions could be abated even at zero net cost. Of course, that was a number of 2019, and then that number changed last year, but now again with higher prices, it really depends on the price of gas. So what incentives can we create to something more sustainable reduction-wise? To give you a short overview of the current policy landscape, you've all seen the latest IPCC report that was published this summer, and there was stated that we cannot achieve the 1.5 degree target anymore without looking at methane emissions. So we need to take care of them. And we are really glad that suddenly there was this traction and this global attention on methane. And we really hope that at COP26, something will happen to really tackle this. A couple of weeks ago, the European Union and the United States together came up with this methane pledge. So they wanted to reduce methane emissions by 30% in comparison to 2020 levels within the next 10 years. This, again, is really good news. At the same time, we don't know how to allocate this reduction target across sectors or across countries. At the same time, now 35 other countries have signed up to this pledge, and that really creates some hope for COP26. Just last Thursday, the European Parliament has announced their support for the EU methane strategy that was published last year by the European Commission. So now we can expect a legislative proposal later this year, probably in December. And it will focus, that's really likely, on ELDA, leak detection and repair, especially oil and gas, but also a more comprehensive measurement, reporting and verification framework that also takes into account OGMP, so the oil and gas methane partnership as data input, and will probably be managed by the International Methane Emissions Observatory, hosted by the UN. Also, it will be looking at eliminating routine venting and flaring, and that's something Elisabetta already mentioned. It's also really good. At the same time, it's a lot of uncertainty around certain targets or import standards, for example, for methane. So it's still all open there, even though the direction of travel is becoming clear. So I've already covered this right side here, the regulatory and policy action. So there will be new regulation in Europe, also in the US. There will be an update of regulation and policy quite soon. So far, you are probably aware of the EPA rules, the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Protocol. It's been used in the US for quite a while now, and by many it seems outdated. Also, what we have seen in recent years, and that's more on the left side, voluntary company action. So there is a lot of different initiatives, and they all have a slightly different scope. So some are more focusing on company practices, so how to really reduce emissions, what can be done. Others are focusing more on reporting and setting targets for themselves or their members. And we really welcome that. At the same time, it's missing one thing, and that's third-party verification. So it leaves a question mark whether you can compare those numbers reported by companies and whether you can trust them to really make any claims. So at MIQ, we came up with this idea of certified gas, which in a way combines the best of both worlds. At the moment, it's still voluntary, but potentially it could be adopted by regulators. That's also why we are not for profit. Then it adds this element of auditing by third-party certification bodies. It must be independent. And by doing that, create credibility and transparency for all stakeholders and market participants. So once you have certified your facility, and I'll come to that in a second, you can issue MIQ certificates for each unit of gas produced. And that then is a really practical and tradable tool for the market and can create incentives to reduce emissions. So the idea is really to differentiate natural gas production, but also other elements of the natural gas supply chain. And you're probably well aware of the scheme ABCD for energy efficiency. When you buy a new fridge or a light bulb, we apply the same scheme here based on methane emissions performance for one facility in oil and gas production, but also processing and other segments. This certification and this grading leads to a differentiation of prices that will be found by the market. And it could be a premium or a discount, but in the end, this is what creates incentives for companies. If they get a reward for having better performance, having that certified, showing that to the buyers of natural gas, it creates incentives for them to continue this way to reduce emissions. Examples that show that such an approach can be working are, for example, the guarantees of origin for electricity, whether you have renewable electricity or conventionally produced electricity, or also the sulfur content of diesel, which now is a global standard. So how does it work in detail? I guess you're all aware of the negative sides of just having a methane inventory and just estimating on a high level your methane emissions, not really representing your facility. So still we need somehow a number to rely on, and it's this calculated intensity on the left side. So we estimate methane emissions across the facility and then compare it with the natural gas produced. MIQ is here following the NGSI protocol, which is also based on the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Protocol in the US, but also takes into account emission factors for the greenhouse gas inventory. At the same time, we allow producers to aim for higher certification norms there. So if you have facility-specific emission factors, you can use them. If you can measure certain emission sources, you can use them in your inventory. But at all times, it's just an estimate. That's why we have added two other elements here, and that's the monitoring technology, which we require producers or operators to deploy both at facility level and at source level. So that means the typical LDAR campaign, but for example, also a flyover. And there's different options how you can achieve that. But just detecting leaks or even quantifying them and adding them to your inventory doesn't reduce emissions. So we have added this third element, company practices, which includes training and awareness of employees, so that if a leak is detected, there's also rapid action to fix that leak and capture the gas. So create value from waste, to speak in a better words. So all those three elements are then audited by this third-party certification body and verified. And based on the performances in those three elements, you can get a grade that is recorded in the MIQ registry. Just a word on monitoring technology, since in recent months, I've seen a lot of news and promises around that. And it's really exciting how rapidly this technology field is evolving, and not just deploying different types of technology, but also at all temporal levels. So that could be continuous monitoring on the left side here, in terms of seconds, or it could be just deployed annually. At the same time, at what spatial level are you looking? Are you really walking around with a handheld device, or are you using some satellite subscription services? And I guess there's no single best option to deploy monitoring, but certainly you have a couple of options to make it more efficient and also to answer your personal monitoring objective here. So what question would you like to answer? For example, if you deploy continuous monitoring, that's great to really detect early on there's a leak, but then are you able to fix it also within a couple of days? So we think it's really important to be open for all those different technology solutions and help operators to deploy the best combination of them that really creates insights and finally leads to emission reduction. We are often asked about OGMP and if that would be different from us. And the first thing is, it's not, MIQ and OGMP are not mutually exclusive. They have different scopes. OGMP is more looking at reporting and maybe soon to become more a mandatory reporting scheme that is required by regulators. MIQ is voluntary and creates incentives for producers that want to achieve higher levels of emission reduction, of monitoring, and so on. So what we see is that by looking into all those elements, monitoring, improving your inventory of emissions, training the personnel, all those elements help you to achieve higher levels in OGMP or higher grades in MIQ. And while not all the technical elements of OGMP are already public, we only have the framework documents and a few sources defined so far. We really think that over time, we need to align with OGMP to allow producers not to pick one option, but go for both. And probably once you have implemented one, you're already 80–90% there for any other initiative. Okay, so we have certified independently a facility for natural gas production. And this audit happened before the certification period, we call it. So then within those next 12 months, you can issue certificates based on your monthly production and then trade those certificates on the market. After 12 months, there will be a second audit, really checking, verifying the information provided, and then putting a final grade on a certificate. And only then, when this information is checked by looking back, then those certificates can be retired and claimed by market participants. To give you a short overview what we are actually doing at MIQ and that our concept is working. Currently in the US, we have a couple of audits that are being finalized. And if we add up all those volumes that currently are audited and soon will be available to the market to be traded as MIQ certificates, this volume is roughly equivalent to 13% of Europe's natural gas consumption, or almost 2% of global natural gas production. And while this is just the beginning, because we are looking at production, but soon we will expand into other segments, namely LNG, but also midstream, and hopefully also outside of the US. So yeah, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and some interesting questions.
Well, Marco, thank you very much. That's very great that you invented or you provide independent standards, an independent standard for the oil and gas industry to report the emissions. I have directly a question for you or for George, if he's available. What have been the greatest challenges in developing the MIQ standards? So what was the biggest challenge?
Well, I'll try that because there was several challenges. So to bring it down to the biggest one is probably tough. I would argue like 2 years ago, there wasn't a lot of talk around methane abatement and methane emissions. We noticed quite often we were quite a lonely voice in trying to talk about methane emissions. And that's fortunately, as Marco mentioned as well, completely changed, notably due to the IPCC report and since then several policy initiatives. So that is really great, that difference. I think the other one is because we take a market-based approach, and this hasn't been, or hadn't been done rather, as a concept. In the beginning, it's quite a conceptual explanation, and fortunately we've had early movers such as EQT, Chesapeake, and recently Exxon joining in testing out the certification. And I think that makes it much easier for hopefully the rest of the oil and gas world to follow, because now it's happening in practice. And that is, as Marco said, what we're looking to do over the next year or so, and including rolling it out to LNG is definitely going to be our big next step and challenge to do that.
Okay, great. So MIQ, the standard was introduced basically in 2020, and now you have first big companies, big players in the oil and gas that signed the standard already and promised to comply with. So what will be next? What will be the next crucial steps? Will it be the broad market? Will it be Europe? Will it be Russia? So where will you go next?
Wow, if we could predict that. I think with the United States will definitely grow. There's a huge interest there in certifying the gas, so that we expect that to keep growing. And I think over the next weeks we'll make some further announcements with companies there. I think quite soon we'll go to both Europe and the LNG sector. What we have seen is a huge interest in the LNG sector for this. And I think it's been driven a bit by the fact that cargoes can be traded internationally, the fact that there's also a phenomena recently of what's called green cargoes, and that's been heavily debated. And I think since then there's been a demand for more clarity around the methane emissions and the CO2 emissions to do that rigorously. And that's obviously something where what we at MIQ, we can offer the markets to do that properly, again, as an independent and not-for-profit certifying party. So I think that's going to be the big next step. And what is exciting about that is then we will be able to do what's called an LCA, an adapted LCA rather, concept life cycle analysis. So you can imagine LNG or gas rather, being produced in the US, being exported through liquefaction plants, goes on a ship, arrives in Europe. Well, that will be perfectly comparable, apples for apples, with LNG being produced in, for argument's sake, Qatar or Nigeria. And as a buyer in Europe, a utility can then compare those three types of suppliers on the methane emissions. And that's quite exciting, and that's going to be pioneering quite soon, I think.
Okay, very interesting and great initiative. But there are other reporting standards existing already, and there's always, in my mind, there's always the thought, or I'm afraid that most companies will probably not like to report, so they will expose some risk during reporting. So what should be the incentive for the big producers to sign up in MIQ?
Well, I think it's actually, from the producers we've been speaking to, it's actually almost the other way around. With the attention there is on GHG and also methane emissions, I don't think companies are necessarily not wanting to be clear on the methane emissions they have. So that's what we at least are seeing. And obviously there's leaders in there, and then there will be laggards. But that's also why we've created it with a market-based system, because we're convinced that it's going to create differentiated prices in the markets on gas. And currently gas prices, as you probably know, are highly different depending on the location of delivery. Compare the US with, I think it's $56 recently in Japan, and what was it, $5 in the US per MMBTU. So that's on location, but there is no differentiator on basically methane emissions. And I think by creating that transparency, that is going to create clarity to companies. Okay, can I get more from my gas if it's lower methane emissions versus the next layer versus the next layer? And then we're back into what commodity players have done over the last 100 years. You go and compete on price, and you make your investment cases, and you make your usual kind of spreadsheets and present it to the board on, I need several million, and we're going to earn, I don't know, 10 cents per MMBTU more, or whatever the numbers all become. Because we can get lower methane emissions, and at the same time bringing the emissions down, because that's ultimately the goal, of course. So we see it very positively.
So as a consumer, I would be happy to pay less for cleaner gas, definitely. So thank you very much for this presentation and for answering some questions. We are shortly running out of time, and we want to ask some questions to Elisabetta as well. Julia, do you have some questions for Elisabetta?
Sure. And yes, first of all, I would like to ask you something about the obtaining a triple win, the concept of obtaining a triple win related to gas recovery.
Yes, this is a concept. No, thank you for the question. I think it's a right definition, because triple win means triple E. Essentially, it's environment friendly, employment, and energy for domestic use. So it means that with the mini LNG, in a way, you catch three goals, and that means that is I would focus especially on the employment, because I spoke already about the access to energy by population that are not reachable, or that would be uneconomically building a pipe and so on, and also with respect to the LNG for, let's say, mitigating the environmental threat. But with respect to employment, I think it's a positive message that has to be treated, because with respect to developing the mini LNG, you would definitely need, to use mini LNG by recovering the flare gas, you would need special expertise. So you will have to upskill the people you have already, and also hire new professions like data scientists, robotics engineer, project managers, which are very keen on using data. And I read that, for example, in the US, there were more than 200 companies that were looking for new, let's say, new professions related to the methane capturing business. So new roles that will be enabled thanks to the exploitation of the recycle and repurposes of gas. So a kind of new workforce that could be underway, and that is one of the three triple win, the employment. So I would cut that short in order to allow other questions, but I think that it's well matching.
Okay, I'll do also another question from Josh.
Yes.
That is small-scale LNG breakbulk, bunkering, and LNG for transport are making great strides. Small-scale or micro-scale liquefaction does struggle with competitiveness, as we say. What do you think is the primary thing that we will need to change to unlock the potential? It is purely policy and regulation, or there is something linked with technology and innovations related to cut the costs?
Yeah, no, I like very much the question. So, Josh, thank you very much. And I think that yes, the main point, I think, it's the support of the local, let's say, the local government to encourage investments, because the technology is there, but it's still costly, and the local population maybe is not willing to invest much, but will be part of the business. So I think that the local governments, like in Nigeria, for example, will have to grant will grant incentives like tax holidays, reduced tax rate for a certain period, or zero rate on dividend distributions, so that at least it's a kind of promoting and favoring the new activity. Do consider that, as you know very well, and as you also mentioned in your question, the point is that there are many challenges to develop this mini scale LNG, and that's why there are so few around, and some of these reasons that are, let's say, failing the concept of using mini LNG are the financial issue, the credit worthiness of the buyer, because of course are local buyers that are buying small volumes, but gas is very costly, of course, and also some logistical hurdles. So you can transport via barges with, let's say, safety, but definitely it has a cost. So I think that definitely a clear regulation, let's say, a transparent bidding process to purchase the gas, and a support for financial and tax, let's say, perspective is key. I hope to have replied to you.
Thank you. I think, I mean, first of all, if there is something that someone that has to leave soon, I don't know if we have a few minutes of questions, or we should close.
Oh, I can easily ask another question to the guys from MIQ.
Okay.
Maybe
just
Marco,
maybe
George.
Because I remember that George had a sharp stop. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
George, you're still with us, yeah? So great. So my additional question would be, maybe we mentioned it already, we explained it, maybe not enough. The carbon neutral LNG cargoes. Yeah. So how does the MIQ standard relate to this recent phenomena? So what is it, a carbon neutral LNG cargo, and how do you deal with this?
One is for George.
So yeah, so the carbon neutral, the term itself will already raise many questions and raise many debates. And I'm not going to wade into that one here, or whether it should be called green cargo, carbon neutral, carbon offsetting. There's loads of terminologies flying around it, and it's all clearly in its initial stage. Where we are coming from is the following, that if the industry, and I'm now going to talk widely about the concepts, wants to do such a very wide concept, and we think there's actually 3 stages to do this properly. The first is one needs to determine properly, rigorously, the GHG emissions, and that includes methane, of the actual delivered cargo. And from most of the cases we've seen, that is not done properly. It's just using, generally speaking, some very generic methodology. The main one that we've seen is UK DEFRA that is being used, which is basically the average LNG imported into the UK, average into the UK. And that methodology is applied for individual cargoes being delivered mainly into Asia region. And I don't think I need to go into the detail to kind of, that just doesn't seem the appropriate method for determining the methane emissions. It might mean that it's overestimated, it might mean underestimated, but just conceptually, it doesn't sound like that's the right methodology for using this. And then the second part around this is once one knows these emissions, then I think it's also important to be very transparent around that and aim to first try to aim buying a lower emissions cargo, because one can then choose between a lower methane emissions cargo or a higher methane emissions, and the same can be valid of the CO2. And then only then is there a third choice for saying, okay, maybe I'm going to offset the remaining emissions of the cargo once it's landed wherever it's going to. And then obviously there's a whole debate around the quality and the types of offsets, but I'll park on that last one. So that's kind of where, as MIQ, we fit in. We think it's key that if the industry wants to move ahead with this concept, it needs to be done rigorously and properly. And that includes the methane emissions and dealing with that as well.
Okay, and how will you determine the methane emissions along the whole supply chain? So basically measuring what is leaking where, so from wellhead to the consumer. Will you just do it yourself? Will you ask project managers like me to do it for you, or technicians? So what is required to measure what is actually happening?
So what we've got is what we call the MIQ modules for the different parts of the supply chain. And so we've started with upstream, which is the audits that are taking place at the moment in the US for upstream. And we've announced a week ago our modules for LNG. And there's 3 types there, LNG liquefaction, LNG shipping, and LNG regas. And for each of those areas, again, there's an assessment, an audit that needs to follow the standards, and that will be done by a third-party auditor. And then inside the companies, that involves all this huge amount of people on the upstream side, on the technical side, on the engineering side that need to work together with the audit firm to make that happen. And that's where it obviously gets very interesting. As a result, each facility will get a grading. And then what one then does is one adds up along the chain with a concept called life cycle analysis to determine what are the final emissions arriving at the regas terminal. And so there's quite a lot of parties involved, I would argue. We at MIQ, we provide merely a framework, modules that we rely upon the markets, the engineers, the consultants, the technology providers as well to apply. And obviously there's really interesting conversations that we are already seeing with people that we are speaking with, where one might initially get A, and Marco's shown you the grading from A to F. For argument's sake, let's say a facility is going to get a D grade or something like that. Well, then there is a good discussion that already takes place within those companies, including with the auditors or external consultants or internally in upstream or with the engineering departments or the operating departments. Okay, how can we go from a D to a B or an A in the next year or the next 3 years or whatever the planning becomes? And that's where it gets exciting in our perspective. Once you create that clarity around the methane emissions, and the CO2 is not that complex actually, that can be added clearly, that's when it gets really exciting for everybody to start looking into the types of the most efficient projects to try to drive down the methane emissions. And I know Elisabetta cited some of the types with which that can be done. And that's what we're hoping is going to happen. It comes down ultimately to, I think is a mantra that I still remember from when I used to work in the industry as well, is what you measure is what you manage. And that's what's needed here. Once you got the numbers, it will be managed. We're very confident of that.
Yeah, that sounds very promising. And thank you very much for this comprehensive overview. I don't know how your negotiations are going with Eni, but maybe Elisabetta is already convinced to sign the MRQ standard. What do you think, Elisabetta?
No, sorry. I was just distracted 1 second by the light. So be so kind to.
Would you or would Eni sign the MRQ standard? Are you convinced?
Yes.
Oh, good. Simple answer. Thank you very much. No, I think it's great. It's great that we have an independent reporting standard coming up, and I think it's very useful for measuring and managing our methane emissions in Europe and everywhere in the world. And I'm very thankful for Elisabetta to giving us an overview about her ideas to create value from waste, and to thank you very much also to Marco and to George to presenting this new approach of an independent reporting standard from MIQ. Julia, do we still have any questions from the audience maybe? Or is it everything we have for today?
For Elisabetta, we don't have any other questions from the audience. We had one for MIQ that was reply by chat, but maybe we can also add some comments because it was regarding the certification. The point is how do you evaluate new technology for reporting standard in respect to a new continuous monitoring solution? So that was the question.
Okay, maybe any comments on that or comments from our speakers? Additional comments? Okay, otherwise I would just mention there was one off-topic question that we will probably not answer. It was about recycling of windmills and how we're going to deal with this, but I think that's absolutely off-topic for this talk. We can deal with this in another Gaia talk in the next weeks, definitely. And then I would just kindly ask our speakers for a quick final statement. So to close this Gaia talk today. So Elisabetta, what is the most important thing that has to happen to successfully manage our emissions and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions?
I think that we should rely on technologies and demand, which are there. And I think that in that case, new business models, opportunities can be created in order to reduce the methane emission. So technologies and demand. Okay, super. Thank you very much. Marco, George, what do you think? What is the most important thing that needs to happen next to quickly and realistically measure and manage and reduce our methane emissions?
Maybe I can try first. I think it's really about not waiting anymore for any policymaker or regulator, but act now. I guess there's enough examples out there that can be followed. There's positive narratives, there's even tools. Start now.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, I totally fully subscribe to Marco's view there. Act now, and I would like to add, taking into account that we are speaking here with the SPE, I would like ask all the engineers in the SPE to start acting on methane in their respective companies and make that, even if in the company it's not the priority, make it your responsibility or goal to push that. When we look at the total numbers, and Marco cited some, this is the biggest low-hanging fruit there is when it comes to fighting climate change. And it'd be amazing if all the engineers could help us realizing that. It's a realistic goal, it can be done, and everybody's got a huge part to play. So that would be my demand.
I agree. They should be the best ambassador. So
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, dear speakers. Thank you, Julia, and thanks the audience. We had about 80 people in the audience today, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your contribution and your support. And have a good evening or a good day, depending on where you are. I saw some logins from USA even, and I'm very happy. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.